Guys, I got bad news about wealth taxes. They are unconstitutional.
Wealth taxes in what sense, though? Like all wealth taxes?
Well, I mean, taxes are all about loopholes, so I mean, like, assess how much a person is worth by trying to add up all the things that they own, and then tax a percentage of that is unconstitutional.
Part of the Constitution prohibits it.
Is this taking into account the state of property when the Constitution was written, because it is no longer constitutional because some of that property would have included slaves, which are now amended out?
I'm glad I have you guys right where I want you, wondering what the hell I'm talking about.
Guilty.
On the edge of my seat, dude.
I'm not going to answer your questions.
My seat is just very small, so I'm kind of always on the edge of my seat.
Oh, that is a tiny seat, dude.
Looks
It's
like
a very tiny seat.
child's chair.
I am sitting on a child's chair.
Well, we all know the founders. If they hated one thing, it would have been black people. But if they hated two things, it would have been black people and
women?
Taxes.
Oh.
Wait, what?
If they hated three things, it would be black people, women, and the British.
They were not a big fan of the British either. That's true. Yeah, no, they really didn't like taxes. You know, I don't know if you remember from history learning about all the stamp taxes and tea taxes and a bunch of very unpopular taxes that the British imposed on the American colonies. They even had a slogan, no taxation without representation. But if you had to sloganize the Constitution, you might shorten it to no taxation. So let me pull up a couple relevant sections. So Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States.
So, wait, that makes sense, right? Like,
isn't this already not true?
I get the theory. Of course it's not true. Like, not all taxes are uniform across the United States because there are state taxes. So,
and places that aren't states, like Puerto Rico, that don't pay income tax.
And Guam, and the Virgin Islands, and Canada, which some people believe to be its own country.
My understanding, after having read a few of the relevant sections of the Constitution and learned about a couple of the relevant cases, is that basically the Constitution is, like, unworkable in its tax rules. Let me talk about a couple examples of this. So this idea of apportionment. So I'll just say that. This idea of apportionment. So basically, they are allowed to levy a direct tax if it is proportional to the state's populations, including the 3/5 rule. And so if you think about what that would mean, so it would be permissible for the U.S. to say, okay, we need to raise $10 billion. California has, 5% of the population, so 5% of $10 billion is charged to California. Similarly, everywhere else. So they could do that, and then the states would determine how to collect that tax. So like, that's one type of tax that the Constitution allows.
There's no taxes that work like that, right? People are 5/5 now.
I'm not saying that the 3/5 compromise is still in force, but I'm saying, like, that part of the Constitution also is not just talking about representation in Congress, it's also talking about tax burden. And it kind of seems like the main concern of the framers when it came to taxes was making sure that the states weren't taxed unfairly, which is kind of interesting because the states are taxed unfairly today. So anyway, so that's thing number one, is apportionment. Just weird. Like, so yeah, you were like, okay, but there's no tax that works like that, right? Of course not, because that would be absurd. That makes no sense at all. That would be an extremely unfair tax, right? Like, California, your average worth per person in California compared to Louisiana, if you had the same, tax per person on those places, it would be really unfair to the poorer place. So it's just unworkable. In other words, like, that type of tax makes no damn sense.
I'm fighting against my inner demons here because on one hand, I hate a regressive tax in all forms, but on the other hand, maybe take that, Mississippi. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So, but no,
That'll show those people unlucky enough to be born there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a hard fight against my demons. I'm just saying, there's some appeal.
Okay, so taxes that are taxes that are explicitly allowed: imposts, excises, and duties, all three of which I needed to look up the definitions of repeatedly. No idea what the hell those things were.
It's like stuff for imports, right?
That is a duty and also kind of an impost.
I think you're called to duty, and then you shoot zombies in the White House with JFK.
That's the second definition of the word duty. And third definition of duties is, of course, what you would like to do on the White House lawn.
Easter egg hunt? Is that what you want to do at the White House lawn?
Nope. Duties. Okay, then there's excises, which is the actual, this is like the actual thing that they're allowed to do, which is tax on consumption. And that's kind of like the main thing that national taxes are built on.
So where does property tax fit in this? Just because it's local governments, they're allowed to levy taxes that Congress isn't?
Sorry, so reason number 3 that the Constitution is unworkable, or its tax thing, it makes no sense, is that it forbids direct tax. Now, what does that mean? Nobody knows. And that's why it's unworkable, is because it's just how the Supreme Court will interpret it. So the examples given in some of the Federalist Papers of what a direct tax is basically are land and a tax per person. And so those are explicitly not allowed in the Constitution. And I think that, like, if I try to interpret this, I think that this basically means no property tax, no wealth tax. Like, I think that's what's meant by direct. I think it's like a little bit of a mental pretzel to say otherwise.
So the Federalist Papers, right? They're like the essays that some of the framers wrote about the need for a constitution and basically what they thought it should do.
And like some of the minutia, making the arguments for it, saying
Sure.
what are the consequences, trying to win support for the Constitution.
They are famously not the Constitution. Like so many documents, they are in fact not the Constitution.
That's true, but I'm just saying, like, so when you see something like in the Constitution, it talks about how you're not allowed to have a direct tax, and you're asking yourself, well, what the hell is a direct tax? Then you can go to the Federalist Papers and see like repeated references to a direct tax followed by examples and basically a definition of what they mean by a direct tax. So I think it's still a pretty useful way to try to understand what they meant.
Yeah, okay. It was like papers that they were like publishing in like newspapers to try and persuade people to vote for like their preferred form of the Constitution, right? To like justify like a strong federal government in particular.
There's another interesting part of the Constitution that relates to what taxation is legal, and that's the 16th Amendment.
Refresh my memory. That's around slavery, right? Because that's
a little
14.
bit after.
Yeah.
14 is no more slavery.
Yeah, this was in 1913. The 16th Amendment legalized income tax.
Refresh me if I'm wrong, but wasn't there income tax before that?
It was struck down as illegal because it blatantly was.
But like 50 years later.
Yeah. It took them a while. So this is kind of what I'm saying when I say that the Constitution on this matter is a little bit unworkable. Like, it's just like, doesn't relate really to what we do. And like, it's like they had an income tax, and then eventually, due to, I guess, politics, the balance of who was in the court, they're like, this is obviously illegal. And then they passed a constitutional amendment. They're like, okay, we're not like getting rid of our income tax. Like, this is how we fund the government. So
I gotta say, this conversation is really, I don't know, opening my eyes to like what it must be like on the other end of the aisle. For people who are against taxes generally, like for whatever reason, and also consider themselves sort of constitutional originalists, it must be so frustrating to see all this stuff that's just blatantly not how the Constitution works as written. And it also happens to be the thing you hate the most, which is taxes. And then for that just to be the law of the land, you gotta just kind of deal with it.
Right now, I don't know of any like gross violations of this. I think that basically, like most taxes, like property taxes, are state level. So like a wealth tax at the state level is legal if the state constitution allows for it. And property taxes, I'm paying them. They're legal at the local level. And so that's the Constitution doesn't stop that.
So the future of wealth taxes is local.
It might be. It is a little bit challenging, right? If there's this sort of race to the bottom with taxes that is a challenge. But I think that the 16th Amendment also demonstrates that when there's enough desire to institute one of these taxes and it's illegal and the Supreme Court stops you, then you just amend the Constitution. which is what they did. I feel like this could be what ends up happening with abortion rights, right? Meaning that the majority of Americans want there to be abortion rights. The Supreme Court allowed it for a while based on possibly dubious logic. So then that was overturned. And so now they'll pass an amendment. And it might take a few years, but
Never
like
pass,
if it's
dude.
really...
There's no way.
Why
Or
do you
which
say
way are
that?
you saying? They're going to pass an amendment to ban abortion or to protect it?
To permit it, to protect it.
I don't know, dude. I'm not sure it'll happen. Do you think it'll be through Congress or you think it'll be state conventions? Because that's the two methods.
I didn't mean to go too deep down that
All right.
rabbit hole, but
fair
I'm just
enough.
saying, like, that sequence of events seems like kind of the way that we get around the fact that the Constitution is kind of unworkable in many situations. It's like clearly opposed to the popular will and to the laws that get passed, and vague and open to interpretation. I mean, because this is the thing with this direct taxes, right? It's like, even though, okay, you can dig through the Federalist Papers and make a guess at what it means, you could interpret it differently.
Plus,
And it's like, well,
some-
Congress passed this law. It's clearly, it has support. Direct is a little bit vague in what it means. Unrealized capital gains. If they were to pass an unrealized capital gains tax, it's like, I don't know, is that a direct tax? If it has enough support, like, who cares? I could see the Supreme Court thinking that.
If you wanted a national wealth tax, it might require a constitutional amendment because the Supreme Court has proved to be incredibly vulnerable to influence from the wealthy. Are they going to strike down a wealth tax on constitutional basis? Abso-freaking-lutely they are.
certainly
Yeah,
this Supreme
but-
Court.
I think they would. Though, so there's an interesting tax precedent from Chief Justice John Roberts that I think that some people think gives them some hope that this actually might get through even this court. And that is the 2012 case, NFIB versus Sibelius, which was over the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
I mean, everyone knows. You don't need to get into details over NFID versus Sibelius.
Right. I have that one, the decision tattooed on my forearm. I
Locked
don't.
and loaded.
Right.
But just in
I
case anyone, might have had some late brain damage and forgotten,
Yeah.
maybe we could go over it again real quick.
Yeah, we have some pretty dumb listeners. Fine. Maybe not. Maybe not.
Not
Maybe
you,
not.
but the other ones.
The other guys. Yeah.
Not you. Talking to you?
You listening,
you.
you're special. You're the smartest listener by far. And our favorite.
Okay. All right. So you guys might realize, you guys probably know that the Affordable Care Act included an individual mandate, basically a penalty if you didn't have health insurance that year. And that penalty was collected by the IRS, and it was determined when you filed taxes. And I say it was, I'm pretty sure this still exists. I mean, I know the forms that I need to submit that show that I was insured in my returns. And so the government was arguing that the Commerce Clause justified this. And the Commerce Clause is another total intentional misinterpretation of the Constitution to just be like, well, if we don't think of things like this, then the government can't actually do anything.
It's a weak table leg that our whole system is balanced on top of.
Totally. Yeah.
FDA, EPA,
Of course, the problem is
IRS.
the way they read it, the government can do anything and be involved in anything.
Well, but
Yeah.
so apparently not. So the Supreme Court said nuh-uh to the Commerce Clause justification for the American Care Act, because apparently the federal government can regulate all sorts of interstate commerce, or even stuff that is vaguely affects interstate commerce, but they can't regulate non-commerce. And so in this case, we're talking about people not buying health insurance. So does that make sense?
Not with the way that they've done things other places, dude.
What is not buying, but buying a $0 product?
Well, okay, so at one point, there was a case that came before the Supreme Court where somebody was growing marijuana in their backyard to consume themselves and not sell to anyone. And the
Right.
feds argued that they were able to regulate this because
It impacted
the price of marijuana in the neighboring state, because their choice to not buy weed would, lower the supply or lower the demand, which will cause the price to ripple out across the state.
This might have
Blind,
been different because they
therefore-
were producing. Might have been different because they were producing it.
Yeah, but
But, like,
in
yeah,
that
I don't-
case, they were choosing not to buy something, and that
Exactly.
was enough. But,
No, but they weren't
okay.
penalizing
No.
him for not
Yeah.
buying.
But they were, though.
I
That was their whole
remember
justification.
actually that all of this is bullshit and it's all just power games and it's not even worth addressing these like fiddly little reasons because it's all just a matter of who's in power now is how these get interpreted. I remember.
I mean,
But Phil,
both...
how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? This is important to know.
Okay,
32.
But hold on. But in the majority opinion written by Chief Justice John Roberts, the ACA was upheld because this mandate was deemed a tax and an indirect tax at that. So, collected by the IRS, money for based off of your activities, not based off of your like wealth or your land or something like that.
Or your lack of activities.
Right, I guess. So anyway, there's just kind of a pretty important, if not for the Chief Justice siding with the majority, I believe that was a 5-4 decision, and we wouldn't have had, Obamacare would have been thrown out otherwise. So
there is no longer a federal penalty for not having health insurance, by the way.
Yeah, is that something that they got rid of?
It just doesn't apply to us because we're in California. So
there's a state penalty?
Yeah, there are state penalties. I mean,
California.
One assumes.
Land of the taxes.
All right, so what have we gotten out of this discussion? Wealth taxes are probably not constitutional, but the government's fine to ignore it when they want to anyway. So, what should we do with this?
You have to reconsider this as your pet policy. And by you, I mean me. Not that this really is my one pet policy, but I've been thinking about it a lot lately. Yeah, it seems like the Supreme Court would be inclined to rule this unconstitutional, like a Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren style wealth tax. I don't think it makes sense for like a Democratic majority to expend all their political capital on this. Maybe in 20 years. But yeah, I mean, I think something like Andrew Yang's proposal back in 2020, like a VAT tax, which is clearly constitutional, like paired with universal basic income, that kind of a thing, like might be a better like path to like for redistribution. But I mean, even that is anyway. I think that this really hurts this as a viable option.
All right, I have a viable option though. It might be a slightly crazy idea. Bear with me here. All right, so you guys know about civil forfeiture, right?
Yeah.
The problem with the wealth tax,
when the police take your stuff.
Yeah, no, the police charge your stuff with a crime, actually. So you're talking about a wealth tax, but you're not actually. You're talking about a people tax. You're going to tax people, dude. We actually tax the wealth itself, dude. Because, the wealth isn't protected from direct taxes by the Constitution. Only the people are.
So that's one version of that I've heard is just like a tax on companies, right?
Yeah.
Like just on the wealth of a company.
No, I just mean like if there's $1 billion, you tax that $1 billion, $10,000. United States
right.
versus 5,000 items, more or less, each containing one set of clacker balls.
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I mean, but one version of kind of that is just, like a whatever, an irrevocable trust is an entity. It is not a person. It could be taxed based off of its wealth. A corporation is not a person, or maybe it is, but okay, let's say it's not.
Let's all say it's not as a country. Let's go back to when we thought that.
So, that I think ought to be, you should be able to tax that based off of its net worth, like its market cap, for example. I think there are lots of other alternatives that could be equalizing, and it's unfortunate that a wealth tax does seem to be such a direct and intuitive approach. But our Constitution our framers were more focused on state by state fairness, which they totally failed to achieve. And yeah, we're not fast enough at updating this document.
I feel like this is so important that it's like almost new country level important. I think it's more important to be able to curb the power of the wealthy over the vast majority of the people. I think that's more important than it is to have a United States. If the Constitution is not going to be the way to get this done, there needs to be a new Constitution.
Well, one of the framers thought we should completely tear it up and write a whole brand new Constitution like every 10 years or something, right?
That would actually put us in line with a lot of countries. Our Constitution is incredibly unusual in terms of its rigidity and
longevity.
Longevity, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, digging through this, like especially even just like thinking about the Commerce Clause, and also then learning about all this stuff. Yeah, it really makes you. It just undermines the idea that this document is really usefully at the core of our system.
But it's not surprising. This is a country created by a revolt of aristocrats
Against taxation, specifically.
against taxation. Maintaining the Constitution is not the important crisis of our time. The rampant inequality and the coming peril of a future where the profits of the elite do not depend on the health and safety of the majority of the population. That and also the planet dying. Those are the big problems of our time. So
if
it
you've
might be
got
time for drastic measures.
an idea for our new constitution, leave it in the comments. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Tomorrow.
Or yeah.